Now, I left off by saying that religion is an important part of the context, the background to the Euthyphro. And I mentioned the notion of myth, right? So, and today we often think that, well, myths are just, fanciful stories or whatnot, and they're not, to be taken seriously or whatever. But the Greeks did take their myths quite seriously. They regarded them as very meaningful, very significant for their lives. Now, did they believe them literally, in that sense? That's up for debate. Some people probably did. Some didn't. Socrates doesn't, but he takes the myths seriously. He doesn't just brush them off as nothing, but to say that he takes them literally. So significantly and literally are not the same thing. You could take something literally and significantly, right? So you believe it's literally true and it's important, or you could just believe it's an important thing, but it's not a literally true story. Think about how sacred texts, some people, do read them quite literally, like, this is exactly what happened, and it is important. Or you might say, well, it didn't happen like that, but there's still something important. There's a message there. So Socrates clearly takes the myths seriously, if not literally. But Euthyphro, however, takes them literally as well. In any case, one of the myths that's important for us to think about and to have a little bit of understanding is the myth that involves these three gods. And it's a creation myth. It's articulated very nicely by an earlier writer, a guy named Hesiod. And if you want, you can go back and read his works and days and a variety of his writings that often the ancient Greeks, like he was prior to them, kind of like in a figure like Homer. So Homer and Hesiod would have been sort of great figures that Plato and Aristotle would have looked up to and either admired or tried to refute or whatever, but they had to deal with them. So Hesiod tells very nicely the story of Uranus, Kronos, and Zeus. And these three gods this is like a family, right? So there's grandpa, there's dad, and there's the grandson. So Uranus is one of the early male gods. And anyways, it's a very complicated story, but the real point of it is, and you'll see why this is brought up when we start to unfold what's going on in the Euthyphro. It's religious, but it also has a very down-to-earth problem, family relations. Namely, how does religion and family connect? Well, they do, at least in this dialogue. So Uranus is this terrible father. So Uranus begat Cronus, and Uranus was horrible to Cronus. And eventually Cronus, and you can read Hesiod, it's very ghastly what he does, Cronus, what the son does to dad, or granddad here. So Cronus eventually gets rid of him. He disposes of him. He basically, he kills his dad, right? And Kronos doesn't turn out to be any better. Another one of these lousy dads. And Zeus eventually rises up and deposes Kronos. So you have a succession of patricides. And so have that in the background of your mind. Robert Graves, a British scholar of the 20th century, wrote a nice collection of retelling the Greek myths. So have a look at that, or go back and read Hesiod. Very interesting stuff, but the very idea here is that the universe is, it's permeated by gods, and they have their little family troubles, and this particular family story is relevant. And yes, it stops here with Zeus. Not that Zeus is all that great of a guy. Zeus is a pretty rough kind of character too. Zeus and the rest of the gods on Olympus are a pretty nasty bunch. They're not, really kind of nice peacenik type gods. No, they demand sacrifice, and they get involved in war, right? So if you look and you read Homer's Iliad, the gods are right in there. They take sides. So and sometimes we, even today, some people pray and think gods and God or whatever take sides in a war. So that's an old idea in religion as well. In any case, so Zeus becomes the main god. He kills his father, and that's where that myth for us, it's not the ending of the whole myth, but that's where that part of it will end for us. So it's good to know a little bit about that. Now, I want to shift away from religion. I'll come back to it in a bit. Plato's dialogues overall usually are examining a concept or a term. The Republic, the great dialogue, the Republic, probably perhaps probably Plato's best known, at least most famous dialogue. That is basically an examination of a concept, just like most of his dialogues are. And the concept, and I've written it in the original Greek, is dika, right? I tend to not want to translate everything. I like to preserve the original word because it forces us to approach the text with fewer of our preconceived notions. So what's the translation of dika? Well, it's the interpretation of it into modern English. It's usually the just or justice. So yeah, you can say that the Republic is a large-scale study of the concept of justice, or it addresses the question, what is justice? And that's how a lot of Plato's dialogues start, is somebody will say, hey, Socrates, what do you think justice is? And Socrates will say, well, sit down, break out the wine and figs, and I'll tell you. And so it takes him several hundred pages, but he does articulate basically a theory. As a matter of fact, there's arguably two theories of justice in the Republic. So dika is the quest, right, to figure out what this term really means. And it's not just how we happen to use it. It's what does the word really mean? So words are connected to reality in a very deep way. And you understand reality by understanding concepts of reality. So it's not the case that it's just you'd run around and look at how do people happen to use the word dika. That's not what you're doing. You're looking at the concept of dika itself, and by articulating and digging in on that, you're going to figure out something very profound about the universe and our place in it, how we live with each other. As Socrates says in the Republic, this is the most important examination of all. That is how we're going to live together. Now, so this idea of Socrates coming along and examining a concept also comes up in the Theaetetus, which is another dialogue, a very famous one of Plato's, where Socrates is engaged in trying to figure out what knowledge is. So here it's dika, and here it's episteme. Episteme is basically translated loosely as knowledge. That's where in philosophy we get the term epistemology. And the ology is like logos, which is reason, speech, study. So episteme, sort of knowledge, or epistemology is the study of knowledge. So, and that's what they do in the Theaetetus. They talk and talk and talk about trying to figure out what episteme is. What exactly is knowledge? Not an easy thing once you start digging into it. Our dialogue, the Euthyphro, is an examination of these concepts, Eusebia and Hosea. And Eusebia and Hosea, like this is a kind of like right reverence, and this is the holy. Roughly what's going on here is the Euthyphro is an examination of a religious concept, namely piety, because Socrates was accused of violating piety, so violating some proper religious behavior. Now, this idea of a dialogue or a philosophical investigation being the examination of a concept, Plato is not the first one to do it. He's certainly not the last. So the pre-Socratics, those philosophers that we today refer to as coming before Socrates, we call them the pre-Socratics. Plato didn't call them that, and obviously Socrates didn't, and they certainly didn't call themselves the pre-Socratics. But there's a group of philosophers that started the whole philosophy game going, and what they did is they examined concepts. Plato picks that up, and perhaps Plato's most famous student, Aristotle, in one of his major works, Nicomachean Ethics, which is basically a study of how to live a good life. His quest here is to understand the concept of eudaimonia, and eudaimonia is badly translated as happiness, right? It's more of, you can think of eudaimonia would be better translated by a phrase in English like doing really well in a variety of ways in life, like good health, good, you're wise, you're well educated, you look good, you sound good, and you're enjoying things, and you're enjoying skillful things, but you still have bodily pleasures, but you have lots of mental pleasures. Sometimes people say it's better to talk about thriving or flourishing. Nonetheless, The most important takeaway from this is that it's examination of concept. Here we're going to look at Euthyphro. I'm going to concentrate on the term Hosea. If you look at the little marks above the little omicron here, or the little O, one is a stress accent. This little one here is a stress accent, and this other little curved guy, he is telling you to have a rough breathing. So it's Hosea, right? So an emphasis, ho, it's not Osean, it's Hosea. So I'm going to use the word Hosea in our discussion. Try not to always think of piety, but that's roughly what it corresponds to. And the Euthyphro is an examination of that.